Evening all, welcome to another Kingscrusher radio show. So we're going to carry on looking at the best of the best from the 1970s. So this is part 1 of 5 for the 1970s. So here is another iconic game. Bent Larsen against Boris Spassky, played in the classic USSR versus rest of the world match. So this is a very, very interesting match where Fischer was actually playing board 2. He hadn't been playing for quite a while and was okay playing on board 2. So this is like the board 1, okay, of that match. Let's have a look. So Bent Larsen playing white, representing the rest of the world, played b3, which is one of his systems, which he's an exponent of. Quite a novel approach to the opening, and often it would pay him dividends against most grandmasters. Spassky just played a sensible looking move, e5. Now this pawn aims to potentially blunt this bishop though on the diagonal. Let's actually add, let's connect to the live book and add a Koblents as well. Okay, so we have bishop b2, knight c6, just supporting the e5 pawn. c4. Okay, so the move c4 here is interesting, so playing a bit like an English opening. But already black must be doing okay here. Knight f3 is... Knight f6, pardon me, is played. And quite a provocative move now, which is not seen that much in this position overall, according to live, but usually e3 is played here. This seems to be the usual move in live book. For example, d5, c takes, and this should be an okay position. White is playing a kind of reverse Sicilian here. It looks like it should be okay, this type of position, or nearly okay. So the move e3 anyway seems to be the most played here overall. Now in this game we see knight f3, and this is slightly provocative. It's encouraging black to just move forward. Okay, the downside is this pawn could be weak later. So is it like an Alekhine defense in reverse or something? The thing is, after bishop c5 now, it's okay, it's quite an interesting position. White actually perhaps does best here to play knight f5. Maybe this is an interesting move, knight f5, because that bishop's not controlling f5 here. But instead, we have knight takes c6. Now before we go into knight takes c6, because this seems to give black a very comfortable position, let's have a quick look at knight f5. How, for example, d5, this should be okay. This position here should be okay for white. Yeah, it's kind of tricky. It gets a bit tactical, but it's possible that this position is getting interesting. Apparently, it might actually be okay for white, or even good for white. This is just a really tactical idea. Possibly one of the better ideas in the position, because this just gives black some advantage out the opening. Yeah, it's the very tactical move though. It's difficult to sort of calculate this stuff with this knight being stranded. If black castles here, it seems again there's some ideas here. So this is just very, very tactical, knight f5. But it wasn't played. We have instead knight takes c6. So Spassky probably is delighted at this point with his opening position. After d takes, is actually opening up this bishop. He's got good central control. It looks as though he hasn't got that much to worry about in this position. And his play's kind of logical and sensible. After e3, he just plays bishop f5, which secures a grip on the light squares. So white does seem a bit passive. Queen c2, and again just supporting that e4 pawn, but also facilitating castling queenside. So white hasn't really shown much of an advantage here, it seems. We see bishop e2. It just seems to be a very passive position, especially after black castles queenside, not fearing any attack on his king here. It doesn't look as though white's in any position to attack. And this binds on the d3, on the poor d pawn, is looking strong. White does exploit that pinned pawn to the bishop by playing the tactical move f4. So clearly if e takes, we can just take here. Okay, but f4 positionally, yes, it does seem to correct grip on e5. However, this position is with the king still in the center, so there's a lot of things involved now. With the king in the center, black plays quite an aggressive move, lunging with his knight g4. And there's quite a few immediate concerns in this position with the king in the center. For example, even this might be, it has to be considered just dismantling white's pawn chain. It's a very dangerous looking position after knight g4. If we look at some of the basic responses here, so if Bent Larsen played bishop takes g4 here, there's check, and this is just very good for black, this position after bishop takes g4. I think this pawn's it can't really be taken. Yeah, this is just too much. There's a lot of escape squares taken away from the king, and in fact here rook takes e3 with rook d1 coming is crushing. So yeah, this simple bishop takes g4, it just doesn't seem to be available. It's not a great idea to try and win the e4 pawn. So we see a sort of passive looking move now. g3 is played, and this is the interesting thing. So if white can play, maybe to kick the knight back, maybe he'd be a bit happier. So to play h3 to just kick this knight back and then get on with things, maybe try and castle queenside later, that would be the dream. However, after g3 a target is set, like a bull to a red flag, h5 as though h4 and hg just to undermine this pawn chain. So this is quite an aggressive idea, h4. If h4 is left on the cards here, let's say knight c3, just allowing this h4, there might even be worse than h4 actually. Now this is behind the scenes, maybe why knight c3 is not played here. This wasn't played in the game, knight c3, but can you see what black can play here tactically? Actually, you might not be able to. It's really, there's an engine crush available in this position. Black to play. I'm not sure if you might have seen this iconic game before, but maybe you're not aware of this variation necessarily. What would you play here with black, do you think? So there's just a variation which didn't occur. Knight c3. What do you think black can play in this position? Okay, well, Onajin on Play Chess reckons h4. H4 is a good move. Actually, there does seem to be an enormous tactical idea. Well, a few enormous tactical ideas, not just one, but multiple here, which all seem to be quite crushing. One of them, though, the more spectacular, is rook takes d2. Let's see what happens after this. Queen takes, bishop takes. Say queen c2, check. And this is nasty. If the king goes there, then there's knight e3 check, picking up the queen. And if the king goes here, this is looking nasty. Knight e3, hitting the queen, and the king's in trouble. Check. Rook d8, threatening queen d2 mating. To which there's hardly any defense. Knight d5, knight takes d5. It just gets really nasty. The king in the center. It's just brutal. It's just really brutal stuff. So it does seem as though this knight c3 falls in with rook takes d2. Yeah, this seems to be a crushing thing here. On king takes, again, okay, we can just say play a check and knight takes e3. If queen b1, queen d7 threatens queen d2 mating. And it's pretty horrible, yeah. If knight takes e4, let's have a look. There's nasty things like knight takes c4 threatening bishop e3 now. And it gets extremely unpleasant. So yeah, the devastation, there could be mass devastation with rook takes d2. It's a very tactical move, but also, I mean, the position here is so strong that actually also h4, and even if white castles, the peculiar thing about this position here is even if white does castle, there's still rook takes d2 in this position. If queen takes d2, we can rule that out. Bishop takes e3 will win the queen. If rook takes d2, knight takes e3, where does the queen go? If she goes there, this position is also terrible for white. That's a nasty pin. And yeah, just things are falling apart here. The bishop's on the rook there. It's just all falling apart. It's remarkable, yeah, even if... So after knight c3, it just seems as though black can either just take on d2 or play even h4. But yeah, this is the remarkable thing, yeah, that even this position, rook takes d2, this just doesn't seem any way to defend here. If king takes, this is not pleasant either. Here, h takes g3, it's just a nightmare again. The king's just uncastled. So anyway, it seems fundamentally there's something actually wrong with white's position at this point, that he can't actually play knight c3. Now maybe this is some great mystery, I don't know, not explained, but yeah, knight c3, you'd think white would want to sort of castle queenside. So it seems, yeah, tactically white's just going to get crushed on knight c3. So he plays h3, maybe hoping this knight would retreat, which will take all the bite away. Yeah, if the knight retreats, surely it would take a lot of the bite away. Say knight f6, knight c3, a lot of the bite's taken away. So there's no rook d2 business, and that would be happy, you know. That would be happy for white, potentially. But yeah, black had another idea in mind here, very cruel, in this position, extremely cruel with that king still in the centre. So we have some pieces just not out of the box yet. So this move kind of exposes those issues. So you might have seen this game before. Black to play here. What would you play with black? If I give you a few seconds on stream. Okay, you might have seen this game before. Yeah, it's a pretty classic game. We have to move actually h4. It's a bit of a shocker. It is one like the strongest move, it seems, in the position. Technically, if bishop takes g4, let's have a look. This wasn't play bishop takes g4. Then here, takes and takes is really dangerous for white. For example, rook g1, rook h2, and I don't think there's enough time to castle. If knight c3, the rook's join forces on d2 here, so there's not enough time to castle. And even if white gives up the queen, check, and it's just horrible. It's horrible for white. So yeah, so it seems bishop takes g4 is not that possible. So white takes h takes g4, then we have h takes g3. So this is a magnificent conception coming up now. Now, actually, you know, white is actually technically lost. Even if white like takes on h8, this position is just horrible. For example, if takes check and then g2, this pawn's like queening or doing something horrible to white. Yeah, it's just a nightmare. So white tries rook g1, maybe thinking he can get away with this. All he needs to do, surely, is knight c3 and castle queenside. That's all he needs to do. But black doesn't give him much time at all with this next move. Which is pretty devastating. So black to play here. There's actually a few moves which are all really strong. One of the top three is played, which gains a lot of time for black to attack and exploit the king in the center. Okay, there's a classic iconic move played here now, which, believe it or not, is rook h1, gaining a ton of time, gaining a tempo, gaining another tempo potentially. In fact, the position is so strong here that actually this move is also good. If takes, it might actually be an upgrade on the same idea. With that d file open, might actually be an upgrade on the game for those technically minded. But let's have a look at the game, because this is spectacular. g2, rook g1 is looking plausible, but in the game we see rook f1. On rook g1, check would be strong, and here just queen h1 on that rook, and white cannot cope with this position with his pieces all like this. It's just a nightmare. It's a total nightmare. Yeah, he's just totally busted. So he tries actually rook f1, but still now check, and after king d1, black just took on f1, and here lost and resigned. So quite a crushing win here. Only like 17 moves. It's just after takes, bishop takes g4 is actually a mate in 3. Say bishop e2, then there's checkmate, and say king c1, then there's queen e1 check, queen d1, and queen takes d1 is checkmate. So yeah, it's quite a crushing game. The whole game is quite crushing. Absolutely crushing game. So it's an iconic game, and this was voted like the best of the best by Chess.com members for the 1970. Yeah, it's pretty dramatic stuff. So I think we have some lessons in this game about maybe playing surprise openings against really strong opponents. What can happen is more fundamental violations can be exploited with the king still in the centre. Yeah, the queenside pieces just never got out. This opening of the h-file was spectacular, never giving white any time to play knight c. He just really wanted to play knight c3 and castling queenside, you'd think. He never got to do that. He was never given the chance. Black forced strong dynamic play against him. So, yeah, absolutely crushing. Okay, I hope you got something from that game. You've probably seen that game before. I expect many of you have probably seen that game before. It's such a classic game. It finished, just to recap, at move 17 actually, with G takes f1 apparently. So this was the final position. G takes f1. It's a slaughter. It's a slaughter. Total. Okay. So Spassky obviously very, very dangerous, showing how dangerous he is 2 years before the classic World Championship match between himself and Fischer. So in 1970 shows what ferocious attacking player he can be. Alright, now let's go to the 1972 match for the next game. So Fischer against Spassky, 1972. This is one of the more celebrated games of that match. Fischer playing white against Spassky. So this is in game 6. And Fischer's shocked everyone with c4. He didn't play e4, which he says like is best by test. So it seems he tricked maybe the Russians in their preparation with this, because he's never played like c4 that much. So yeah, this is a classic game worth reviewing over and over again. So that's what we're doing. I have reviewed this a few times on the channel before. We see e6 and it transposes into a Queen's Gambit declined Tartakower variation, because after e3 we see after h6 bishop h4 b6, so the Tartakower variation. C takes, knight takes, bishop takes e7, queen takes. This is all very theoretically trodden. Now I won't go into huge detail analysing this. I just want to get the gist of it again, just as a sort of recap. Yeah, you can find dedicated videos to this game on my channel with quite a lot of analysis. We'll just get the gist of it here. Of again what happened. Rook c1, bishop e6, queen a4, c5. So these hanging pawns, are they a liability or an asset potentially? Rook c8. We see the move bishop b5, a6. This is all kind of trendy stuff at the time. D takes c5, b takes. Now white castled, Fischer castled, and black unpinned with rook a7. So he's now threatening a takes b. Bishop drops back, knight d7, and white now plays knight d4, exploiting that pin to grab this light square bishop. Now possibly this next move is a little bit passive. Queen f8 was played. Possibly maybe knight f6 might be a more energetic way to play the position than what happened here, because it keeps a lock on the e4 square. In the game this would be an upgrade on the game actually, because that lock on e4 might be important. Because if we look at what happens now in the game, queen f8 was played, and in fact here, right here, is a very nice idea. So e4 is not totally under lock and key, and Fischer actually took off the light square bishop, and guess what, this is an ingenious move which damages black quite permanently on the light squares, this next move. White to play. It's a very, very nice move positionally, because white would like to say that his light square bishop is superior to the light, and this move kind of assists that. If black got another move, this is a case of just one more move and it will be okay. I think if black got another move here, he would be playing knight f6 to just keep a lockdown on e4. So again, it's like these games are slightly tragic, this one and the previous one, in that black is just one move away from what he wants to achieve a comfortable position. But one move is often the difference in chess between success and failure. It's kind of tragic, really. Actually, if you think about it, this game and the other game, it's kind of tragic. These players are just one move away from what they need to do, just one. But it's never going to happen now. It's never going to happen. Fischer cruelly plays e4. He's trying to break down the doors of this diagonal now. This idea is really quite devastating. If d takes, that would leave black's pawns in a rack, and in fact white doesn't even need to be in a rush to do anything here, it seems. With the pawns like this, you can see how isolated they are. It's a nightmare pawn structure. In fact, it seems queen e3, this is sufficient for even this line, even this crazy line, just remaining a pawn down is ultimately, it's going to be really good for white. Let's have a quick look at this crazy stuff. There's a rook hanging there. So even this line, white's going to be like, yeah, it seems as though basically the greedy among you might think d takes e4 and try and do something with this, try and get some squares. But yeah, it just seems this is really strong for white. Even f3, even if we play this as a gambit, this position, black's just in big trouble here. Look at this. He'll end up again with, even if he loses the pawn back, and he still has loads of issues with his pawns. So yeah, it seems as though d takes e4 doesn't exactly do black any favours. So instead, you might think knight f6 might be a sensible move, just to maintain the integrity of the pawn structure. But here, like e5, this is dangerous. If knight e4, I think white just gets a nice position like this. And if knight d7, again, white's pretty comfortable here looking at e6. Maybe targets e6. This is comfortable for white. So yeah, there's some tempting alternatives maybe to what was played. Perhaps, maybe best is queen d6, because here you know, it's delicate not to get a massive positional disadvantage. But even here, this again looks as though there's a lot of pressure on black's position. And in fact, b4 here, this looks unpleasant. So yeah, it's a tricky position already. After e4, it doesn't seem to matter what black does. He's suffering a bit positionally. What he did try was d4. It seems as though both knight f6 and queen d6 might be technically a little bit better than d4, because this is really, when you put pawns on dark squares, the adjacent light squares are weak. And here that c4 is very nice for this bishop. So already, like, white's got the upper hand now, and he fixes down against e5 first before even celebrating c4. It doesn't have to be in a hurry to make use of c4. He fixes down against e5, that rook there, controlling against e5. And in fact, plays e5 himself. So bishop c4 is even better now. It's going to be against the e6 pawn, which is a fixed target. So here we have a wonderful position emerging after bishop c4. Wonderful. King h8 is played. Queen h3. Sorry, I think there might have been a trick to make note of in this position. Rook B, I don't think rook, something about rook b4. I don't think it helps anyway. Pardon me. Okay, so king h8. We have rook h3 queen h3 targeting the e6 pawn. Knight f8, b3. White's got a nice blockade on the light squares, and this bishop's definitely more aggressive than the knight. So he's got a nice big advantage from the opening here. f5, and he's opening up the f file, making his rooks more aggressive than black's rooks. Because when you have doubled rooks like this, and the opponent's rooks are flat, it's usually, usually you're the aggressor, and that's the case here. These rooks are doubled, ready for action and infiltration. These rooks are all more passive. So we see queen d8, queen g3, rook e7, and now a big passed pawn is potentially on the cards with e6, which would open up that e5 score as well. But first h4, and now it's e6 time, which gives that e5 square. So white's rook's super aggressive, black's rook's passive, knight passive. Rook bc7, queen e5, nice central queen, pinning the pawn. Possibilities now of rook f7, queen e8, and white fixes down the queen's side for a moment and just gets to the time control with a few shuffling moves, so helping get to the move 40 time control. Now bishop d3, which looks at this diagonal, which is also, it's pretty sensitive here. Queen e8, queen e4. So there's an immediate tactical mate in free threat with the check, because if takes, and then queen h7 mating, so there's an immediate threat of mate in free with rook f8. Just to put that on the board for you here, look, if a bad move, rook f8, rook takes f8, this is like mating. So yeah, black's has to deal with this horrible threat. He plays knight f6. So guess what white plays here? White's play here. So sometimes you sacrifice to further your positional trump cards. Sometimes the positional sacrifice is useful to further your positional trump cards. So what would you play here with white? Well, black is also, by the way, with black is potentially threatening after knight f6 to do some damage here, whereas when it's attacking the queen. If the queen humbly went back, black's going to take on e6, thank you very much. So that's not going to be allowed. Rook takes f6, at least protects this pawn, parries everything. Rook takes f6, again protecting the pawn, hitting this one. And it's this one which is very vulnerable now, after king g8. Let's see, after king g8, probably a lot of things are winning here. Yeah, all of these moves are probably winning. Rook takes, h6 is probably winning. But bishop c4 is played. And black's really not doing much in this position. His king's really been compromised. After queen f4, in fact, black resigned here at move 41. Let's have a look at this position. It's miserable. If he plays rook h7, then rook f8 check is winning the queen. So it's a miserable position. Queen g8. Again, rook f8 just wins the queen quite simply. If king g8, then rook takes h6. The king is stripped nearly bare, and this is just horrible because there's going to be horrible things happening here. I'll give you an example. Rook takes e6 is ridiculous. That's the engine's choice. Queen g6 is ridiculous. Let's try and play a totally non-ridiculous looking move. But check. We have this discovered check. And that's horrible. Yeah, that's totally over after that discovered check. Queen of something, just queen. Checkmate. Ouch. Yeah, so it's after queen f4, there's really no defense here, because it's simultaneously creating that battery against f8 and also hitting the pawn. So yeah, a brutal game, but you can see how at one moment with the hanging pawns, just one passive move, and all of a sudden a player like Fischer, he seizes his chance to exploit that lack of a lock and key over the e4 square. He plays e4 and gets a big positional edge, which he uses to get his rooks doubled and just get a crushing attack on the king side. And I believe Spassky was so impressed he started applauding after the game as well, which Fischer thought was very gentlemanly of him. Yeah, it's one of the more stunning games of the match, but you can see a lot of the problems started positionally as well when black got compromised on the light squares. You can check out my longer video on this game with a lot more analysis, but if you want like the principles though to recap, this game was really about the hanging pawns and about the bishop versus the knight, and how sometimes when the hanging pawns are fixed, yeah, and the opponent can get a really good bishop, it can be a basis of a very, very strong attack. So I hope you got something from this great game as well. And yeah, check out my detailed video analysis of both games as well. So we're just trying to get a recap on these games. I hope you enjoyed that. Okay, so leave any comments on YouTube. Have a good week. See you next week. Thanks so much. Cheers then.